Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for bearing with us until the end of today. Next up, we have Daniel giving us a talk about musicbrains.org and wikidata.org. Daniel is a frequent LCA attendee, and I remember him coming to our first ever GoGlam, which was fantastic. So it's good to see familiar faces giving talks to
I've
us.
been going to as many LCAs as you have.
Oh, geez. It's been a long time then. He's also a music enthusiast, and I will hand straight over to Daniel. Thanks.
Okay. Hey everyone. I'm gonna give an introduction to two projects that I've been editing for many years, and hope you learn something. Yeah. So about me, I'm Daniel Sobey. I'm from Adelaide. I attend linux.conf.au sort of in my spare time, sitting in front of the TV. I occasionally edit a website called musicbrains.org. I have 31,000 edits, and I'm not one of the software developers, or there's things called auto editors that can auto approve things. I'm just a normal person that's just been stuck around for ages. So the two projects that I'm going to talk about is musicbrains.org. It's a website. It's got music data. It's got things about artists, labels, recordings. It's not necessarily all music. There are things like audiobooks and other things that are sort of music related. We don't really care if it's a commercial CD or someone's SoundCloud that they've uploaded something. It just has to exist. And the other project I'm going to talk about is wikidata.org. It's sort of a parallel database used by Wikipedia to link all the sites together and to store factual information. So there's going to be things like the height of Everest and the height of all the large mountains, presidents, all sorts of things, films, you name it, there's probably an entry for it. And it's another database that anyone can edit, and they sort of have two different approaches to how they're structured a bit. So they're sort of related, sort of do things differently, and hopefully if I get to it, I'll explain some of that on the way. So it's database of Music Brains. It's a database of audio recordings. Each entity has a long string, a UUID. That's really important because there's an awful lot of name collision and that's sort of thing. So there are two bands called Pendulum. They both have ARIA awards. You have to be able to say which one it is when dealing with such a big database. It's pretty much all user edited. There's pretty much no bots that edit. It's hosted and run by a non-profit organization called metabrains.org. They do get funding. The data is all public, mostly Creative Commons Zero license. They get funding from things like Google and Spotify and other big music companies. So we provide the raw data and they'll use the data to help fix up their system, and that's sort of been enough to help fund the organisation and keep a few key employees keeping the lights on, fixing bugs, adding new features. There's a public API, anyone can use it. The thing that we need from that, if you're going to use the public API, is in your HTTP headers, you need to include a string to say who you are, so we can let you know if you're doing something really bad. That has occasionally been needed, and if you have a QNAP NAS, they would be hitting the API. Every NAS that was in existence was hitting the API so much that eventually they decided to block them. And if you need to use the API, you need to say, "Can you please unblock me?" until they update the software to not hit the NAS every 5 minutes. Each entry has an edit history, so you can easily say who was the idiot that made this change, and hopefully it's not you that made it stuff things up. So the basic data structure is we've got artists, we've got release groups, which I'll get to in a minute, but that's sort of the overall concept of an album. So there is a release, which is a specific one. So you might have a CD with 13 tracks and a special edition with 18 tracks and another edition with 2 CDs. So to fit all the concept of these different editions, there's the release group, so anything that fits in the overall properties, the data store in the release group, anything that's specific to a particular CD goes on the release. There is mediums, so we can have data about things like records and wax cylinders and all sorts of other medium types. You can add, of course, we've got recordings. We'll get to that a bit later. There's works, which is sort of the writing credits and that sort of thing, as opposed to who sung on it. There's labels. There's series. There's relationships between the two, and then there's a few other things like we've got a definitive list of all possible instruments and things like that that are maintained by the editors and developers. So here's an example of what you'd go to see Daft Punk. One thing that you might want to take notice of from the GLAM perspective is we try to link to other databases and have identifiers as much as we can. So IPI and ISNIs are therefore rights societies and that sort of thing to track a particular person or a group. There's attributes to say who are the members of the group. There'll be another artist entry, so you can have further detail. We link to official home pages, YouTube pages, Twitter accounts, that sort of thing. So if you've got a SoundCloud, we want that sort of information, so that makes it easier for if someone finds an artist, they can find more information about them. So yeah, lots of URLs, lots of extra data. So release groups, sort of the overall thing. So one thing that I'd like to include is, if you look down a bit further, that you can have link to singles, so link to other releases, and there's a whole bunch of relationships of this relates to this other thing. So everything's built with relationships that you as an editor can add and expand the knowledge. So if you look at associated singles from random access memories. They've got Get Lucky, Instant Crush, etc. So getting back down to the further level of a release, you can have things like Barcode. There's cover art isn't hosted by musicbrains.org. That's hosted by archive.org on our behalf. So if you upload cover art, archive.org will host it for us, and if there's a copyright issue, they can deal with it as another organisation. You've got a list of tracks there. There'll be catalogue numbers and that sort of thing. So mediums. There'll be a type, so it'll be CD or DVD or just digital download. One of the edge cases that two edge cases that I'd like to point out is a thing called a pre-gap track. Some CDs, when people were experimenting, a CD doesn't have a proper table of contents. It's not a data track. It's just PCM audio, and it's got when you put in a CD, it reads the table of contents says start at 1 minute, start at 3 minutes, start at 5 minutes for the next track with a 2-second gap. There are a handful of CDs that have hidden tracks. So you put the CD in, you press rewind, and there's hidden data there. So if you've got some of the early Hilltop Hoods, they have hidden tracks that it's just them chatting, but some cool things like that. The other example is from 9 Inch Nails Broken. What they did is the maximum tracks that you can have on a CD is 99. So they had the first 6 were normal, then a whole bunch of tracks that had a fraction of a second as audio, and then the last 2 are the tracks 98 and 99. So if you've got a CD player, it would play, skip to the last 2, and you can't go back really easily because there's a whole bunch of silence. So recordings is where you add an awful lot of data. It's sort of up to the users how good the data is, but the schema allows for things like who played bass guitar, who played keyboard, who sung. So with some of these really popular tracks, you get extra data that you can use to tag your music. And the other thing is they usually, if someone's gone to the time, they'll have works. So works is who wrote the thing. It's got IDs from right societies, allowing someone else to double check your work, and they're all linked to who actually wrote it. And yeah, the other thing that you want to take note of is classical music in Music Brains is sort of more important to have works than it is to have artists on track, because the classical music, they tend to deal with arias which have movements and subsections. So having that sort of structure as a series of works that link to other sub works allows people that are interested in classical music to say, I want to listen to this bit. So if you've got time, feel free to look at. There's also labels, which is sort of who owns the copyright and who's the publisher. And there's a list of series is sort of something that they've added sort of 5 years ago for things like compilation albums, which it's going to be the Ministry is Down year number, that sort of thing. So everything is a sort of fixed structure, creating new relationships. They're sort of hard coded, so there's a lot of asking in forums, discussing tickets on what gets added, and some things like musical instruments, there's a person that has a list of possible music instruments, and you've got to ask them to add it to the system in the back end. There's a query API which you send it a string and it'll return you the album or the barcode or something like that, and then you probably want to do a lookup thing to say, give me info about this ID, this album, release group, etc. So the other sort of related thing, if I've got time, is let's talk about Wikidata. So that's sort of built in a different sort of thing. Everything is item, property, value. So everything's built from that sort of basic structure. So if you go to Daft Punk's Wikidata entry, it's an instance of an electronica duo, which is a instance of a musical group. They've got start and end years. Wikidata is good for things like awards received. You can easily add more awards, so if they've won a Grammy, record that properly. And it's another thing for good sorts of including external identifiers. So you can, from MusicBrainz, you can link to Wikidata, and from Wikidata you can link back to MusicBrainz. So looking at one, you can look at the other. Properties are added, so relationships are added through a voting process. You sort of go through that process and say, I want to propose something. So going from a talk earlier, if I go to add my web ID from a talk earlier, that was something that was proposed, and give it what format your URLs are and pattern matching, and that's how Wikidata extends their possible things that you can use. So querying is done through a thing called GraphQL. It's done through a thing called Sparkle. I mean, it sort of looks like this. You have a list of select statements, so you define what you want. You'll have a list of where sort of clauses to say this property on an entry, or look for things with this property on the entry, where exist or not exist this such and such limit. So this is sort of that thing. So changing gears to, if you wanted to look at things with a ACMI ID, this is the sort of query that you'd have to say, give me the ACMI ID, which is that there, and optionally return genre if they've got that on the film, optionally include the country, the director, and based on. So there's all sorts of things that you can do with that. So I think my time is nearly up. So
Yes, thank you so much. And we've actually got quite a few questions for you, which is fantastic. First question is, are there any metadata standards for this stuff, or is MusicBrainz just the de facto?
We've got an API, and you use the API.
Yeah.
It's all it's available in JSON, XML, RDF. It's sort of, it used to be, they've de-emphasized RDF because no one was really using it. It was an API that no one really used, so everyone just uses JSON now, pretty much.
Okay. How does MusicBrainz deal with erroneous or conflicting data?
It's usually someone will edit it out. So I think the data quality it's pretty much there. It's 95% accurate. Looking at a random CD, find the occasional typo here or there, but sort of because of the way that the editing system is, it enforces constraints so that people are less likely to make idiot moves. You sort of feeds you down the path to the most correct data, and someone can then come back later and fix your mistakes.
Okay. In the streaming world, how does MusicBrainz work?
It doesn't really make a difference. It's an album. It's got a list of tracks. There's a digital medium, so you mark it that it's digital, and that's it.
Okay. Do record labels or artists send data to MusicBrainz in a way that can be ingested easily, or are they just generally unhelpful?
They're generally unhelpful. There's been a few proposals of back-end systems, but they've sort of been against automation a fair bit. It's sort of, we want quality instead of random junk that a label sent you. So
yeah. And one last question: is it only via API, or are there forms that people can fill in to add data?
So you just go to the website. If you want to find Daft Punk. So say if I wanted to edit this and mess with the title or something, click edit and mess with the title.
Ah, cool. So it's a form.
Change the artist to something else. Click next, and click accept. You need to put in an edit note to say what you're doing. So yeah, sort of.
Now that seems quite simple.
You follow the bounding box and hopefully get there.
We should all contribute to it. This looks relatively easy to do, so that's fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Daniel. That's it was great to see those two sites for us to contribute to, because I always know that I'm happy to put in more data where possible to help out. So thank you so much.
Go to musicbrainz.org, download a program called Picard. That's the tagger that they work on, and there's a few other taggers. So some of the CD rippers you put the CD in, it'll automatically retrieve the data.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.